Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The journey begins. Maya Johnson strode into the bustling airport terminal, her leather heels echoing off the polished floors. The faint scent of brewed coffee, the murmur of hurried conversations, and the robotic cadence of announcement systems filled the air. Maya's heart swelled with a mix of anticipation and resolve. Today wasn't just another work trip. Today, she was on a mission to bring change. Her tailored navy blue suit fit perfectly, accentuating her poised demeanor. A crisp white blouse peeked from beneath her blazer, and her braided hair was tied back into a sleek bun. She carried herself with an air of quiet determination, a characteristic honed over years of breaking barriers. In her left hand, she clutched a leather briefcase, a symbol of the critical documents and ideas she planned to present. Maya was not just any professional, she was a leading advocate for justice reform, known for her eloquence and unwavering passion. Today, she was headed to Washington, D.C., for an emergency summit. The President of the United States had personally requested her presence to discuss systemic issues that plagued marginalized communities, a cause she had dedicated her life to. This trip wasn't about her, it was about the countless lives that depended on the policies she sought to shape. As she approached the check-in counter, her eyes scanned the space. Families hugged goodbye, businesspeople shuffled through security, and vacationers excitedly planned their trips. It was a typical scene, yet Maya felt the weight of her mission pressing against her chest. She stepped up to the counter and was greeted by Mark Bennett, a middle-aged man with sharp features and a name tag that gleamed under the terminal lights. "Good morning," Maya said with a warm smile, sliding her ticket and ID across the counter. Mark glanced at her documents, his expression unreadable. "Ticket and ID," he repeated curtly, as though she hadn't just handed them over. Maya blinked but said nothing, chalking it up to an overworked employee's morning routine. Mark picked up her ID and squinted at it, then at her ticket. His fingers tapped against the keyboard, each keystroke louder than the last. Maya stood patiently, mentally rehearsing her opening remarks for the summit. She imagined herself addressing a room full of policymakers, her words igniting the spark of change. But Mark's deep sigh broke her concentration. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, there's a problem with your paperwork." Maya's stomach tightened. "A problem?" she asked, her brows knitting together. "Everything should be in order. I double-checked before leaving." Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. "It appears your ID doesn't match the details on your ticket," he said, holding up the documents for her to see. Maya frowned. "That's impossible." "Can I see what you mean?" Mark hesitated, then slid the documents back across the counter. Maya studied them intently. Everything appeared correct, her name, photo, and ticket information were aligned. "I don't see the issue," she said firmly, handing them back. Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he typed something into his computer and picked up his phone, speaking in a hushed tone. Maya shifted on her feet, confusion giving way to unease. Around her, other travelers moved through the lines seamlessly, but she felt as though a spotlight had been turned on her. Minutes passed, and the line behind her grew restless. Finally, Mark hung up the phone and turned back to her. "I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, but I can't allow you to board. You'll need to resolve this issue with the appropriate authorities." Maya's jaw tightened. "Excuse me? I've flown numerous times with these documents, and there's never been an issue. I'm scheduled to speak at a critical summit in just a few hours. This delay is unacceptable." Mark crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "I'm just following protocol, ma'am." "Protocol?" Maya's voice rose slightly. She glanced around, aware of the curious glances from nearby travelers. "What protocol requires you to deny someone boarding without any valid explanation?" Mark didn't flinch. "I suggest you step aside and contact the airline's customer service desk." Maya's pulse quickened. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but she knew better than to escalate. Taking a deep breath, she stepped aside, her mind racing. She pulled out her phone and dialed the airline's customer service number, her frustration mounting with every passing second. As she waited on hold, she couldn't help but notice the subtle stares and whispers around her. She heard snippets of conversation, words like angry and disruptive floated to her ears. The air felt thick with judgment. Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to let the weight of assumptions crush her spirit. Finally, a cheerful voice answered on the other end of the line. "Thank you for calling Pacific Skies Airlines. How can I assist you today?" Maya explained the situation calmly but firmly, emphasizing the urgency of her trip. The representative promised to investigate and placed her on hold again. Minutes dragged by, and Maya's irritation grew. She glanced at her watch. Time was slipping away, and her chance to make it to the summit on time was dwindling. When the representative returned, their tone was apologetic but unhelpful. "Ms. Johnson, we're not seeing any issues with your paperwork on our end. It seems this might be a misunderstanding at the counter. I'll escalate the matter to a supervisor, but that could take some time." Maya clenched her jaw. "I don't have time for this," she muttered. She hung up and approached Mark again, determined to resolve the issue. "I just spoke with customer service, and they confirmed my documents are in order. I need to board this flight." Mark looked unimpressed. "As I said, ma'am, you'll need to take this up with the authorities. I can't override the system." Maya opened her mouth to respond but stopped when she noticed two airport security officers approaching. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, addressed her. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Maya took a deep breath. "Yes, there is. I'm being denied boarding without any valid explanation, despite having all the necessary documentation." The officer exchanged a glance with Mark, who shrugged. "She's flagged in the system," Mark said vaguely. "Flagged?" Maya repeated, her voice rising. "Flagged for what? I've done nothing wrong." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, we'll need to escort you to a private area to sort this out." Maya's heart pounded. The situation was spiraling out of control. As she followed the officers, the whispers and stares grew louder. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and angry all at once. But even as humiliation threatened to overwhelm her, she resolved not to let this incident define her. Somehow, she would turn this around. Maya followed the two security officers through the airport, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Each step echoed her frustration and determination. The curious stares of bystanders bore into her, but she kept her head high. Inside, however, a storm brewed. The injustice of the situation, the humiliation of being singled out, and the knowledge of what was at stake filled her with a fiery resolve. They entered a small, windowless room near the security checkpoint. The sterile space was lit by fluorescent lights that cast a cold, unforgiving glow. A plain table and 3 chairs occupied the center of the room, and a security camera perched ominously in the corner. One of the officers gestured for her to take a seat, and Maya obliged, setting her briefcase on the table with a decisive thud. The taller officer, who introduced himself as Officer Grant, sat across from her, while his shorter counterpart, Officer Rivera, stood by the door with his arms crossed. Grant opened a folder and began leafing through documents that seemed entirely unrelated to her. Maya folded her hands on the table, refusing to show any signs of intimidation. "Ms. Johnson," Grant began, his tone measured but impersonal, "we're conducting a routine investigation due to a flagged alert associated with your travel documents." Maya raised an eyebrow. "And what, exactly, does this flagged alert entail?" "Because I've flown countless times with the same ID and ticketing process without issue." Grant glanced at Rivera, then back at Maya. "We can't disclose specific details at this stage. Our role is to verify your identity and ensure there are no security concerns." Maya leaned forward slightly. "Security concerns? I'm an attorney and an advocate for justice reform, invited to speak at a summit by the President of the United States. My record is spotless. So, forgive me if I find it difficult to believe that this is just routine." Rivera shifted uncomfortably, but Grant maintained his composure. "Ma'am, our job isn't to debate your background. It's to ensure compliance with federal regulations." Maya's patience was wearing thin. "Then comply with federal regulations and verify my documents properly. I have nothing to hide, and this delay is jeopardizing not just my schedule, but the critical work I'm trying to accomplish." Grant studied her for a moment, then stood. "We'll need to run an additional background check. Please remain here while we process the information." Without another word, the officers left the room, the door clicking shut behind them. Maya sat alone, the silence pressing in on her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Her mind raced through the possible explanations for the ordeal. Was it her name? Her appearance? The color of her skin? She had faced subtle, and not so subtle, discrimination before, but this felt more targeted, more deliberate. Time ticked by, and Maya's frustration grew. She pulled out her phone, intending to contact her team in Washington, but found that there was no signal in the room. Of course, she thought bitterly. It was as though the system was designed to isolate and disempower her. She opened her briefcase and retrieved a notepad, jotting down everything that had transpired. She documented the names of the individuals involved, the exact words exchanged, and the timeline of events. If they wanted to play games, she would be prepared. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been unfairly treated, dismissed, or silenced because of prejudice. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again, and Grant returned, followed by a third man in a suit who introduced himself as Mr. Daniels, a representative from airport management. Daniels exuded an air of corporate detachment, his expression a mix of feigned sympathy and bureaucratic indifference. "Ms. Johnson," Daniels began, taking the seat across from her, "I'd like to apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today. However, we must ensure that all protocols are followed to maintain the safety of our passengers." Maya's eyes narrowed. "I appreciate your concern for safety, Mr. Daniels, but I fail to see how denying me boarding and subjecting me to this treatment achieves that goal. My documents are in order, and no one has provided a valid explanation for why I was flagged." Daniels offered a tight smile. "It appears there was a discrepancy in the system that triggered an alert. While the specifics are confidential, I assure you it was not personal." "Not personal?" Maya's voice was calm but cutting. "I was publicly humiliated, escorted by security as though I were a criminal, and held in this room without access to communication. How is that not personal?" Daniels hesitated, clearly unprepared for her directness. "I understand your frustration, Ms. Johnson, and we are working to resolve this as quickly as possible." Maya leaned back in her chair, her gaze unyielding. "Let me be clear, Mr. Daniels. I am not just frustrated, I am outraged. This is not simply an inconvenience. This is a blatant example of bias and systemic failure. And I will not let it go unnoticed." Daniels cleared his throat, avoiding her piercing gaze. "Of course. We value all our passengers and will do everything in our power to rectify the situation." Maya folded her arms. "Then start by clearing me to board the next flight to Washington, D.C., and ensure I don't miss my summit." Daniels nodded. "We're working on that as we speak. In the meantime, is there anything else we can do to make you more comfortable?" "Comfortable?" Maya repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I've been through today?" "Start there." Daniels offered another tight smile, then excused himself. Grant lingered for a moment, his expression unreadable, before following Daniels out the door. Maya was alone again, but this time, she felt a flicker of triumph. She had made it clear that she wouldn't be silenced or dismissed. Nearly an hour later, the door opened again, and Rivera entered with a guarded expression. "Ms. Johnson, you're cleared to board the next flight. I'll escort you to the gate." Maya stood, gathering her belongings. "It's about time." As Rivera led her through the terminal, Maya noticed the curious glances of other passengers. She held her head high, refusing to let their stares diminish her dignity. When they reached the gate, Rivera handed her documents back with an awkward apology. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he mumbled. Maya met his gaze. "It's not just about inconvenience, Officer Rivera. It's about accountability. Remember that." He nodded, looking chastened, and stepped aside. Maya boarded the plane, finding her seat near the front. She sank into the chair, exhaling deeply. The fight wasn't over, but she had won this round. She pulled out her notebook, continuing to document the events of the day. This experience would become part of her speech, a powerful example of why justice reform was not just necessary, but urgent. As the plane taxied down the runway, Maya stared out the window, her reflection staring back at her. She thought of the people who had come before her, who had fought against injustice with far fewer resources and far greater risks. Their resilience fueled her own. She would not let today's ordeal deter her. If anything, it had strengthened her resolve. By the time the plane lifted into the sky, Maya had outlined a revised speech that would address not only the systemic issues she had planned to discuss, but also the personal reality of discrimination. She would turn her pain into power, her frustration into fuel. The summit would not just be a platform for change, it would be a reckoning. And when she landed in Washington, D.C., she would carry the weight of today's injustice with her, not as a burden but as a weapon in the fight for a fairer, more equitable world. Maya stepped off the plane into the brisk Washington, D.C. air, her heels clicking against the jet bridge floor as she carried her briefcase with renewed determination. The city was alive with energy, taxi horns blaring, the murmur of busy streets, and the faint rustle of flags atop government buildings. Yet, for Maya, this was no ordinary arrival. Her ordeal at the airport had left her with a fire in her chest that refused to die down. It was not just a personal affront, it was a symbol of the systemic biases she had fought against her entire career. And now, she intended to channel that fire into action. A black sedan was waiting for her at the curb, courtesy of the summit organizers. As she slid into the back seat, the driver greeted her warmly. "Ms. Johnson, welcome to D.C. I hope your flight was smooth." She smiled faintly, adjusting her posture. It was eventful, to say the least. The driver, sensing her mood, wisely refrained from pressing further. The car weaved through the busy streets, passing iconic landmarks that stood as symbols of democracy and justice. Maya couldn't help but feel a twinge of irony. She had always admired these symbols, but her experiences reminded her how far the nation had to go before its ideals matched its reality. When they arrived at the summit venue, a grand government building with towering columns and an expansive marble staircase, Maya stepped out, clutching her briefcase tightly. Journalists and photographers swarmed the entrance, their cameras flashing as officials and activists arrived. Maya was no stranger to media attention, but today, the spotlight felt heavier. Inside, the atmosphere was abuzz with activity. Delegates from across the country mingled in the grand hall, their conversations punctuated by the clinking of coffee cups and the rustle of papers. Maya spotted familiar faces, policymakers, activists, and community leaders she had worked with over the years. Many approached her with smiles and handshakes, unaware of the turmoil she had just endured. "Maya, it's so good to see you," called a familiar voice. It was Angela, her colleague and close friend, who had been instrumental in organizing the summit. Angela was a petite woman with sharp eyes and an infectious energy that could fill any room. Maya smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Angela, it's good to be here." Angela studied her for a moment, sensing something beneath her composed exterior. "Rough morning?" Maya hesitated before nodding. "You could say that. I'll fill you in later." Angela didn't press, but gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We've got your back. Your speech is the highlight of the day. Everyone's been talking about it." Maya nodded, the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. She glanced at the agenda in Angela's hand. She was scheduled to speak in the main hall in less than an hour. That left little time to dwell on the morning's events. She excused herself to find a quiet corner where she could review her notes and center herself. The conference room was a hive of activity, with attendees shuffling between breakout sessions and panel discussions. Maya found a small, quiet lounge tucked away from the main hall. She sat down, pulled out her notebook, and began refining her speech. Her original draft had been polished and powerful, but after what she had endured at the airport, she felt compelled to add a more personal touch. As she wrote, the memory of the incident replayed in her mind. She thought of the dismissive tone of the airline agent, the cold detachment of the officers, and the way her presence had drawn stares and whispers. She wasn't just one person facing discrimination, she was a representative of countless others who experienced the same treatment daily, often without the resources or platform to fight back. She decided her speech would be more than a call for justice reform, it would be a rallying cry for dignity and accountability. She would speak not just as an advocate but as a woman who had lived the very injustices she fought to dismantle. When the time came for her address, Maya walked into the main hall, her head held high. The room was vast, with high ceilings and rows of chairs filled with attentive faces. A massive banner hung at the front, emblazoned with the summit's theme, Justice for All, Bridging the Divide. The stage was set with a podium and a single microphone, illuminated by a spotlight that seemed to focus the entire room's energy on her. As she approached the podium, the room fell silent. Maya took a moment to look out at the audience. Policymakers, activists, and community leaders, all of them had come together to confront the nation's deep-seated issues. She gripped the edges of the podium, her resolve solidifying. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "It is an honor to stand before you today, among so many passionate advocates for change. We are here because we share a vision of a society where justice is not a privilege, but a right. A society where every individual, regardless of their background, is treated with dignity and respect." The audience listened intently as she spoke about the systemic issues she had spent her career addressing. She detailed the disparities in the justice system, the disproportionate impact on marginalized communities, and the urgent need for reform. But then, she paused, her tone shifting to one of personal conviction. "This morning, as I made my way here, I experienced something that reminded me why this work is so critical," she continued. "I was denied boarding on my flight, not because of any legitimate concern, but because of a so-called discrepancy in my documents. Despite having everything in order, I was flagged, questioned, and subjected to scrutiny that others might not have faced. The experience was humiliating, yes, but it was also a stark reminder of the biases embedded in our systems." A murmur rippled through the audience. Maya could see the mixture of shock, empathy, and understanding on their faces. She pressed on. "What happened to me is not unique. It happens every day, in countless ways, to people who look like me, to people who come from marginalized communities, to people whose very existence challenges the status quo. And while I was fortunate enough to have the resources and platform to push back, many others are not. They are silenced, dismissed, and forgotten." Her voice grew stronger, filled with the weight of her conviction. "This is why we are here. To challenge these injustices. To hold systems accountable. To ensure that no one is treated as less than because of their race, their gender, their socioeconomic status, or any other factor. Justice must be more than a concept, it must be a reality." The room erupted into applause, but Maya wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "We have the power to create change, but it requires more than words. It requires action. It requires courage. And it requires each of us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our society and ourselves. Let today be the beginning of a movement, not just for justice reform, but for the dignity and equality of all people." The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation that seemed to reverberate through the room. Maya stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding. She had delivered her message with every ounce of passion and determination she possessed. As she left the stage, Angela was waiting for her, tears glistening in her eyes. "That was incredible, Maya. You just lit a fire under everyone in that room. Maya smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. The morning's ordeal had been painful, but it had also given her the clarity and resolve to speak from a place of truth. She had turned her experience into a catalyst for change. The rest of the summit was a whirlwind of discussions, networking, and planning. Maya found herself at the center of many conversations, her speech serving as a rallying point for attendees. By the end of the day, she felt both exhausted and invigorated, knowing that her voice had made an impact. As she returned to her hotel that evening, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The fight for justice was far from over, but she was ready for the battles ahead. Today had proven that even in the face of adversity, she could rise, speak, and inspire others to do the same. The hotel room was quiet, save for the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Maya sat at the small desk, her laptop open, and her phone buzzing intermittently with messages of congratulations and encouragement. She had barely taken a moment to breathe since her speech, but now, in the solitude of her room, the weight of the day began to settle on her shoulders. Her inbox was flooded with emails from attendees, journalists, and even a few policymakers who had been in the audience. Some wanted to collaborate, others wanted to feature her story, and a few simply thanked her for her courage and honesty. She read through the messages, each one a reminder of the impact her words had made, yet they also served as a stark reminder of the larger fight that still lay ahead. The memory of the airport incident lingered in her mind, not as a source of anger, but as fuel. She couldn't let it end as just a story she told at a summit. It needed to become part of a larger movement. She opened a new document on her laptop and began drafting a public letter, one addressed to the airline, the Transportation Security Administration, and the broader public. Dear Pacific Skies Airlines and TSA, she began, her fingers moving with precision over the keys. She wrote about her experience, detailing every moment from the check-in counter to the security room, but this wasn't just a recounting of events. Maya used the letter as a platform to highlight the systemic issues behind what had happened to her. She emphasized how incidents like hers weren't isolated, how they stemmed from biases embedded in protocols, and how they disproportionately affected people of color and marginalized communities. This is not just about one traveler being inconvenienced, she wrote. It is about a system that consistently dehumanizes and marginalizes individuals based on superficial judgments. I was fortunate enough to have the resources and platform to speak out, but many others are not. This is for them. She called for transparency, accountability, and reform, listing actionable steps that organizations like the TSA and airlines could take to address these issues. Training programs on implicit bias, independent oversight of flagged passenger protocols, and clear channels for addressing grievances were just the beginning. By the time she finished, the letter was over 3 pages long, each word infused with purpose. Maya read it over twice, tweaking sentences and ensuring her message was clear and direct. She saved the document and composed an email to her team, attaching the letter and asking for their input before making it public. Satisfied, she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The day had been long, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. Her speech, her letter, these were steps toward creating the change she wanted to see. Yet, she knew this was just the beginning. Change was never immediate or easy, it required persistence, strategy, and an unyielding commitment to the cause. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Angela, calling to check in. Maya, Angela's voice was warm but concerned. I know you've had a lot on your plate today. How are you holding up? Maya smiled faintly. Tired, but determined. Today was a lot, but it also reminded me why we do this work. Angela chuckled softly. You've always been the strong one. But remember, even warriors need rest. I'll rest, Maya promised. After we've made progress. Angela sighed, knowing there was no arguing with her. Well, if you need anything, you know I'm here. By the way, your speech has already gone viral. People are sharing clips and quotes everywhere. You've started something big, Maya. The news didn't surprise her, but it did add a layer of gravity to her actions. "Good," she said. "Let's make sure we keep the momentum going." After hanging up, Maya decided to scroll through social media. Angela wasn't exaggerating, the hashtag Justice for All was trending, with countless posts referencing her speech. Clips of her standing at the podium, her voice strong and unwavering, were being shared across platforms. People from all walks of life were commenting, sharing their own experiences of injustice, and calling for change. But amid the support, there were also detractors. Comments questioning her account, accusing her of overreacting, or dismissing her as just another angry woman peppered the threads. Maya expected this, it was the price of speaking out. She didn't let it deter her. Instead, she focused on the voices that mattered, the ones who resonated with her message and were inspired to act. As the night wore on, Maya found herself unable to sleep. She replayed the events of the day in her mind, thinking about the countless others who had faced similar injustices without the ability to fight back. She thought about the young black girl watching her speech, seeing someone who looked like her take a stand and realizing she could do the same. That thought alone made everything worth it. The next morning, Maya woke early, her mind already buzzing with ideas. She had a series of meetings lined up with policymakers and community leaders to discuss actionable steps stemming from the summit. But before heading out, she sent her letter to her team, who responded almost immediately with their approval and encouragement. By noon, the letter was published on her organization's website and shared across social media. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a powerful call to action. Activists and organizations began rallying behind her message, amplifying her demands for reform. The airline issued a lukewarm statement about reviewing their protocols, while the TSA remained silent, for now. Maya knew this was just the start. Words were powerful, but action was what mattered. She spent the day strategizing with her team, drafting proposals for policy changes, and planning a campaign to pressure both the airline industry and government agencies to address systemic biases. By evening, she found herself in yet another meeting, this time with a senator who had been moved by her speech and wanted to collaborate on legislation addressing racial profiling in travel. Sitting across from the senator, in a sleek conference room, Maya felt the weight of her work, but also its potential. "Ms. Johnson," the senator said, leaning forward, "your story has struck a chord with people. It's brought attention to an issue that's been ignored for too long. Let's make sure this momentum leads to meaningful change." Maya nodded, her resolve unwavering. "That's the goal, Senator. I'm not interested in band-aid solutions. We need systemic change, clear policies, oversight, and accountability." The senator smiled. "I couldn't agree more. Let's get to work." The meeting was productive, laying the groundwork for a bill that would address many of the issues Maya had raised. As she left the building that night, walking through the illuminated streets of D.C., she felt a mix of exhaustion and hope. The fight was far from over, but progress was being made. Back at her hotel, she sat by the window, looking out at the city skyline. Her phone buzzed with updates, more messages of support, news articles about her letter, and notifications about upcoming interviews. The world was watching, and Maya intended to make every moment count. As she prepared for bed, Maya thought about the road ahead. There would be challenges, resistance, and setbacks, but she was ready. Today, she had turned her pain into power, her frustration into fuel. And tomorrow, she would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. This was her mission, her purpose. And she wasn't backing down. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Maya. Her story had become a national topic of conversation, sparking debates on television panels, social media platforms, and even in living rooms across the country. Every major news outlet wanted an interview, every civil rights organization wanted her voice at their events, and her inbox overflowed with messages from people sharing their own experiences of injustice. She had become a symbol of resilience, a rallying point for those demanding change. Maya knew that visibility was important, but it wasn't enough on its own. She had always believed that true change required action, not just conversation. So, while the media buzzed around her story, she was hard at work behind the scenes. She met with lawmakers, airline executives, TSA officials, and community leaders, leveraging the momentum to push for concrete reforms. One of the first victories came in the form of an airline industry pledge. After weeks of pressure from advocacy groups and the public, several major airlines, including Pacific Skies, committed to implementing anti-bias training for their employees. They also agreed to review and revise their protocols for handling flagged passengers, promising more transparency and oversight. It was a step in the right direction, but Maya wasn't satisfied. She knew that training programs, while necessary, were only part of the solution. What she wanted was systemic change, something that would outlast the fleeting attention of the media cycle. The legislation she had discussed with the senator was beginning to take shape. Dubbed the Travel Equity and Accountability Act, the bill aimed to address racial and socioeconomic disparities in travel security processes. It proposed independent audits of flagged passenger cases, the establishment of a public complaint portal, and mandatory data collection to track patterns of discrimination. Maya had been instrumental in drafting the bill, her expertise and personal experience shaping its provisions. As the bill gained traction, Maya found herself back in Washington, this time testifying before Congress. The hearing room was packed, with reporters lining the back walls and advocates filling the seats. Maya sat at the witness table, her prepared statement in front of her, though she hardly needed it. Her words came from the heart, shaped by years of fighting for justice and the fresh sting of her recent ordeal. Discrimination in travel is not just an inconvenience, she said, her voice steady and clear. It is a reflection of the deeper biases that pervade our systems and institutions. It sends a message to those who experience it, that they are less than, that they do not belong. This is not the America we strive to be. Her testimony was met with applause from the audience and pointed questions from lawmakers. Some were genuinely interested in addressing the issue, while others seemed more concerned with maintaining the status quo. Maya held her ground, responding to every question with clarity and conviction. By the end of the hearing, she had left an indelible impression. Outside the hearing room, a crowd of supporters awaited her. Many were holding signs with messages like "Justice for All" and "End Travel Discrimination." Maya took a moment to speak with them, listening to their stories and thanking them for their support. It reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. As she left the Capitol building, Angela walked beside her, a wide grin on her face. "You were incredible in there," she said. "The media is already calling this a turning point." Maya nodded, though she knew the road ahead would still be long. "We've started something," she said. "Now we need to make sure it doesn't stop." The following months were a test of endurance. The bill faced opposition from powerful interests, and Maya found herself traveling across the country to rally support. She spoke at town halls, met with grassroots organizations, and used every platform available to keep the issue in the spotlight. Her days were long, her nights often sleepless, but she refused to slow down. During this time, Maya's personal life became more intertwined with her mission. She found herself connecting with people in ways she hadn't before, forming bonds with those who shared her vision for a better world. She became a mentor to young activists, offering guidance and encouragement to those who wanted to follow in her footsteps. In their passion and determination, she saw a reflection of herself, and it gave her hope. One day, while reviewing her packed schedule, Maya received an email that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a young woman named Alina, who described an experience eerily similar to Maya's airport ordeal. Alina wrote about how she had been flagged and detained without explanation, how she had felt humiliated and powerless. But then, she wrote about how hearing Maya's story had inspired her to speak out. "Because of you, I found the courage to demand answers," Alina wrote. "I realized that what happened to me wasn't my fault, and I didn't have to accept it. Thank you for showing me that I have a voice." Maya read the email twice, her chest tightening with emotion. It was moments like this that reminded her why she kept going, why she pushed through the exhaustion and frustration. She wrote back to Alina, thanking her for sharing her story and encouraging her to keep fighting. As the weeks turned into months, the bill finally came to a vote. Maya watched from the gallery as the roll call began, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had done everything she could, spoken to lawmakers, mobilized public support, and fought tirelessly for this moment. Now, all she could do was wait. When the final vote was announced, a wave of relief and triumph washed over her. The bill had passed. The room erupted in applause, and Maya found herself surrounded by supporters, all of them cheering and hugging her. Angela was there, tears streaming down her face as she embraced Maya. "You did it," Angela said, her voice choked with emotion. "We did it." Maya smiled, though her mind was already turning to the next steps. The passage of the bill was a monumental achievement, but it was only the beginning. Implementation would be critical, and she was determined to ensure that the promises made in the legislation were fulfilled. In the days that followed, Maya's work continued. She met with officials to discuss the rollout of the new policies, collaborated with advocacy groups to monitor their impact, and kept the public informed about the progress being made. The fight for justice was far from over, but Maya had proven that change was possible. As she reflected on her journey, Maya realized that her experience at the airport had been a turning point, not just for her but for the movement she had helped to ignite. What had started as a moment of humiliation had become a catalyst for transformation, a reminder that even the most challenging moments could lead to something greater. Standing at the podium at yet another event, Maya looked out at the audience and felt a deep sense of purpose. "Change doesn't come easily," she said. "It requires persistence, courage, and the belief that a better world is possible. Together, we've taken a step forward. Let's keep moving." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Maya didn't need the validation. She already knew that the work she was doing mattered. And as long as there were injustices to fight, she would continue to stand, to speak, and to fight for a world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect.